and welcome to Mind Gourmet. My name is Nina Kaiser. I'm the co-founder of Mind Gourmet and, as always, your host today. My today's guest is the best-selling author of several books, including Jump and Your Life Will Appear, Worthy, Boost Your Self-Worth to Grow Your Net Worth, and the newly released book, The New Relationship Blueprint, 10 Steps to Reframe the Way You Love. Nancy Levin. Welcome, Nancy. Thank you for being my guest.
Thank you for having me. I'm delighted to be here with you.
I think I'm even more delighted. And before we are diving into our conversation, I want to introduce you a little to our audience. Nancy Levin is the best-selling author of several books, including The New Relationship Blueprint, a master coach and the creator of the Destination Me private coaching community, as well as many in-depth coaching programs. She guides clients to live life on their own terms. She was the event director at Hay House from 2002 to 2014, and now hosts her own weekly call-in radio show, Jumpstart Your Life, on Hay House Radio. Nancy received her master's in creative writing and poetics from Naropa University in Boulder, Colorado, and she continues to live in the Rocky Mountains. So this sounds like you are a mountain person.
I am definitely a mountain person.
I am the ocean person.
You are the ocean person. Yes, it takes both. And some people are both, but I am not both.
It's almost a little like with dog and cat lovers, which are often either one,
right,
or the other one. So I would like to open this conversation with asking you if you'd share a bit about your personal journey and how did you become who you are today, and what led you to writing this beautiful, beautiful book?
Thank you. So the Cliff Note version is, so as you mentioned, I was the event director at Hay House for 12 years. And I was very much in the space inside of that job of projecting an image of perfection to the world, managing the perception of others. I was a classic workaholic, overachiever, and really lived by the motto, never let anyone see you sweat. So I was very wrapped up also in constantly seeking external validation. And the truth of the matter is that no gold stars will ever be enough. Mm-hmm. So whatever we're seeking externally needs to be resolved internally first. And the truth of the matter is that on the outside, my life looked a certain way. It looked exactly the way that I wanted to present. And yet on the inside, I was crumbling. So in 2008, I had been married for nearly 18 years. And the marriage was very rocky. My now ex-husband was very rageful. There was a lot of energy on my part to try to keep us together and keep the picture perfect outlook to the world. And everything came crashing down around me as I was on my way home from Hay House's very first I Can Do It at Sea cruise. I was on my way home, received a voicemail from him that said, "You better get your ass home. There's hell to pay. I read your journals." Ooh. And in that moment, I was completely just out of my body and out of my mind. What did he read? I barely remember getting myself home. And when I walked in the door, he was standing there with 4 of my journals and said, "Let's see what happens when I send copies of pages to your sister, your parents, your friends, your coworkers. Let's see what they all think when they know the real Nancy." And he knew my greatest fear was exposure, and no one knows how to press your buttons like someone you've been married to for 18 years. So I knew in that moment that I had a choice. I could go back to sleep, or I could really set about the biggest change of my life, which became really the precedent and the catalyst for the jump in your life will appear, that book originated out of, which was really the through line of leaving my marriage once I had already left and could look back and see the steps I had taken.
Yeah.
So it was a 2-year process for me to leave, because I was so ingrained with the fear of anybody seeing the real me. I didn't want to know the real me. I didn't want anyone else to see the truth. But I was able to eventually work through the pieces of my story and of my truth that allowed me to share my truth with others. So that night that I got home and he was holding the journals, I had already made I'd made an exit plan to sleep elsewhere so that I wasn't going to stay in the house, because he was so full of rage. And I went and spent the night at a nearby hotel. And in the morning, after not much sleep, he called me and said, if you don't get home in the next 30 minutes, I'm going to call your parents and your sister and tell them what's going on. So I knew that he wasn't bluffing, and I knew it was time for me to take charge of my own life. And so I made the phone call to both my parents and my sister. And as soon as my parents got on the phone, they were both on a line, I said, I want to let you know that it's likely that we're going to be getting divorced. And my mother said, what happened? And I said, I got home last night and he read my journals and discovered that 8 years ago I had an affair. And my mother said to me without skipping a beat, I'm so sorry you've been carrying this around for 8 years.
Oh.
And I knew in that moment that the dissolution of my marriage would be the great healing with my mother. Because as I talk a lot about in the New Relationship Blueprint, we are operating on patterns and beliefs that were anchored in childhood. So for me, when I was born, my parents were contending with my older brother, who had been born severely disabled, really incapacitated. So when I was 2 years old, he died at 6. And so I often talk about I was born into a mourning family, a grieving family. They were really having to wrap their energy around what was happening with him. So the imprint on me, even as such a small child, was better I be self-sufficient, better I be independent, better I have no needs. And then once he died, really recognizing, if I am imperfect like he is, I will die. Mm-hmm. And again, this is not what's happening consciously when we're that young, but this is how our limiting beliefs and our shadow beliefs get anchored in, get imprinted. Something significant happens when we're children, and because we're not able to process and digest what's happening in a healthy way, we tend to simply personalize it and draw conclusions about us. And the other thing that was another one of these beliefs that was really anchored in, that my mother and I have since discussed as adults, is that I always had this sense of there must be something wrong with me if I'm under this much scrutiny. Mm-hmm. So this feeling of really noticing how I'm under a microscope, or I'm being watched and then criticized and judged. But this scrutiny piece. And my mother and I have had adult conversations about it, where she said to me flat out, when you were born, I was waiting to see if something was wrong with you before I attached to you. Mm-hmm. So it makes, so then we, from the adult standpoint, we can understand. But as children, we're just sort of taking it in energetically. So all of this as a young child for me really put me in this place, like I was saying about, you know, if I'm imperfect, I will die. Therefore, thus began the quest for perfectionism. And thus began this quest to be more than I am, to take up the space of two children for my parents, so to speak, to try to heal a grief in my parents that could never be healed, trying to bend over backwards to please them, to buy love, to ensure their happiness. And this is the way I went through life, always bending over backwards, always people pleasing, always looking for the way that I could fix or rescue or save. And of course, it matched up perfectly in my marriage. Because I often will say that on the day we met, it was as if he introduced himself to me by saying, "Hi, I'm broken." And I said, "Great, I am Superwoman, I will fix you." And so as the marriage progressed and as we became more enmeshed, I began sublimating all of my wants and needs and desires in order to fulfill all of his. And it was unsustainable. I was a champion of endurance, a champion of stamina until I could no longer be. So I will often say that I set the bomb in my journal that detonated 8 years later. And I set that bomb because I didn't know what else to do. Who I was at that time, you know, I'm not sitting here being this advocate for adultery, but what I'm saying is, you know, who I was at that time, she didn't know how to get out. She knew she wanted out, but she didn't know how to tell the truth. She didn't know how to set a boundary. So when we don't tell the truth to ourselves, first and foremost, the truth is going to come out sideways. And we'll create chaos in order to avoid the truth. So it was a long period of time before I was able to come clean with the truth because of the catalytic experience. And I can now assure you that I am beyond grateful that he read those journals. Because if he hadn't, I would still be there. I would have stayed that woman. So in that moment when he was holding the journals and I'm in the hallway, I could never have possibly imagined I would leave my job at Hay House. I would have just published my 4th book. I would be a master coach. I would have a tremendous tribe of engaged people who are wanting to grow and learn and evolve together. And I now feel that because everything that's happened exactly as it's happened, because it really has been, it's happened as it's happened for my own evolution. Everything that's happened brought me where I am today. And so I do believe that we have to look at that map. We have to look at the choices we've made up till now, what brought us here, and then the choices we make now that take us into the future. So I would say that's sort of the backstory. And then what led me into the New Relationship Blueprint is really this idea at first of, you know, because after my divorce, I was like, I'm not doing this again. No, we are not doing this. And I swore off men. I was like, I'm not getting into a relationship. I'm not doing this. And so of course I find myself in a relationship. And the question became, how do I be in relationship after the one that fell apart? How do I do it again without doing it again?
Yeah.
And that became sort of the course of study, the curriculum that I embarked on as I'm in the relationship I'm in, going on, you know, that's actually over 6 years now. How to actually be in this relationship. What are the sort of touchstones along the way to pay attention to as I embark on a very different way of being in relationship, which primarily is being in love without losing myself. Because when I look at my marriage, that was a very, very long time to be away from myself.
Yeah, and I remember in the beginning of your book, you are writing, relationship is first and foremost where we learn to love ourselves.
Yes.
And that's actually a wonderful connection point here. And I would like to ask you, why is learning to love others actually not the top priority? And why is the relationship blueprint actually all about our relationships with ourselves and self-love?
You know, Louise Hay was famous for saying, you know, that essentially we're going to be with the relationship with ourselves is the longest relationship we'll ever have. We better make sure it's a good one.
Yeah.
And so I think it's really critical that this relationship with ourselves is given high regard, because up till now, it's barely even given any attention. So what I see across the board with myself and with thousands of clients I coach is that we're not only not making ourselves a priority, we're not even bringing ourselves into the equation. We're not even giving ourselves a seat at the table. We're used to eating the scraps and the crumbs and making sure that everyone else has the big juicy steak or the big juicy tofu. But we're so used to taking the hit. We're so used to internalizing. We're so used to biting our tongue. We're so used to packaging ourselves to be digestible for someone else.
Yeah.
So what I'm really saying here is that's no way to live. That's not life on your own terms. That's that's living someone else's life. So I'm really on my soapbox about it's time now to make yourself the priority. So not even just give your seat at the table, give yourself the seat at the head of the table now, which people are very quick to say, but isn't that selfish?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm very quick to reply, yes. And we all could use a little more selfish. And I do think that selfish, self-love, and self-care are all three sisters whose job it is to support us in really honoring ourselves even more. So it comes down to, how do I get to know my non-negotiables?
Yeah.
How do I get to know my truth? How do I get to really have clarity around my boundaries? How do I know when I end and someone else begins? How do I know what's my responsibility? And how do I know what isn't mine?
Mm-hmm.
And how do I take responsibility for what's mine and not what is someone else's? So it's really about knowing these limits, what I will and will not do, what I will and will not accept, what I will and will not tolerate. And standing in the truth of this in relationship and understanding that when I am solid in the relationship with me,
Mm-hmm.
that's what actually allows for deeper connection and intimacy with someone else, because I'm not wearing the mask.
Yeah.
I'm not upholding the cape. I'm not expending energy on presenting a persona.
And I sometimes think, at least from my current state of ignorance, that basically how much I'm able to love myself is how much I'm able to love others. So
absolutely. There's a direct correlation. And what I would say is that we've had it backwards, because we often will think how someone else loves me will change how I love myself.
Yeah.
But it's really an inside job. It's got to shift here first, because our beliefs are magnetic. So we're going to draw toward us relationships, people, circumstances, situations that reinforce and corroborate what we believe about ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
So the self-love piece is actually the seed and the key of everything.
Yeah. Yeah. And speaking about drawing people to us who perfectly match us, if I understood it correctly, you basically speak about a paradigm shift in how we view relationships. So that it's not about completing each other, it's about complementing each other.
Yes.
And that's a huge thing.
Huge. So this really comes from the movie Jerry Maguire, you know, that line that got so famous of "you complete me." And I remember seeing that movie when I was married thinking, oh my God, it's not you complete me, it's you deplete me. Because my understanding of relationship was that I was always in the position of giving and doing, overgiving, overdoing. And so when we come together with another and it's you compliment me, it's an enhancement. So the problem with you complete me is what it's really saying is I'm not whole.
Yes.
You're not whole.
True.
We need each other to be whole. So what I'm saying is I am whole. You are whole. And let's bring our wholenesses together and see what is even, you know, it's like the sum is greater than, or the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. So the two wholes then together can create a greater whole, but it's not about not being whole.
Yeah. And would it be right to say that in some way it's impossible to create a state of abundance, which love basically is as well, from a state of lack, like feeling you have to complete me. And I was really smiling when you wrote about those, you know, movies that always stop at the point where the couple, after big drama, finally finds themselves or each other, and then nobody speaks about what happens afterwards. But I discovered really that there's still a little part in me that thinks like, if you find your relationship, it's a good one if it's without conflict, and it's so wrong.
I think, I mean, so I really, one of the sort of myths that I want to bust is this idea that a harmonious state is the be all to end all. You know, that because what I find often is that if we're gunning for that harmonious state and that's really what's most important to us, what's happening along the way is that we're biting our tongue. We're not rocking the boat. We're avoiding conflict. We're not setting healthy boundaries. We're in that space in our head of what do I need to do or say to make everything be okay? So I'm instead of that harmony, I'm much more a proponent of we're going to have differences. It's how it is. We're going to have differences. We want to learn how to actually cozy up to conflict instead of avoid it. We want to understand that we're creating a relationship container that's strong enough for your truth and my truth to be there, even if we're not in agreement. So it's a little bit like agreeing to disagree without the resentment. It's really about agree to disagree or agree to have differences and be in acceptance that there's another point of view here. So it's not about I need to be right or I need to win or I need you to come over and see everything from my point of view or take my perspective. It's really just, can we agree that we see things differently?
Yeah. And one of the sentences in the beginning of your book that I like so much is, no relationship is meant to save you. Instead, it's meant to grow you. Why are relationships, like you describe it, our most potent potential for self-growth?
Yeah. So, you know, here's what I can say about this. After my divorce, I embarked on a really deep healing journey for me. I knew that I needed to work through some guilt, shame. I needed to look at the patterning. You know, I was able to put together the constellation and connect the dots of my childhood, my brother, my mother, me, you know, him, all of these pieces, look at the past relationships over time and really get the pattern. And there was a period, I mean, I look back on it now and I laugh at myself. There's a period where I was like, wow, I'm good. I'm healed. I'm woman. Hear me roar. I got this. No more triggers.
Mm-hmm.
And the truth of the matter is that our triggers are, first of all, going to show up somewhere. They're going to show up with friends, with coworkers, with family, if not an intimate partnership. However, I will say that the most fiery triggers will show up in an intimate partnership. We will be triggered the most by the people with whom we are the closest. And so when we're rubbing up against another person, you know, literally and figuratively, everything is going to rush back. And we are given constant opportunities to learn, to heal. And I will often say that I think relationship is like one long continuum and there's a revolving door. And it's much like in a video game, when you win the video game, what do you win? You win the advanced level of the video game. So
there's always a next level.
That's right. There's always the next level. So I don't know that we're ever done, so to speak. I think we're just constantly being given invitations and opportunities to continue our healing and our growth. And what I have found is that when we're doing it in that container with another, it gives us the way to actually experiment and run sort of research projects and test drive new ways of behaving. The problem is that we think of this as a problem, but it's not a problem. It's a possibility. It's an opportunity. It's a portal into a new way. We get really caught up in the black or white. Mm-hmm. You know, we get really caught up in thinking that if this or this, then we just need to break up. Like we can go to the extremes really easily. Yeah. And so I think that part of this is allowing for there to be the both and, as opposed to the either or.
Yeah. And you've touched on many of the 10 steps actually you outlined in your book already during the time we've been speaking now, but would you give us a short overview over this 10-step process that you outline in your relationship blueprint?
Sure. I mean, without going through like each of the 10 steps, but really what we're going to do, what we do is it begins with being able to come clean with ourselves, being able to like get really clear with the truth telling, like I was talking about, understanding the beliefs, those limiting shadow beliefs in ourselves first, seeing how the beliefs were formed, because everything's going to go back to our origin story. Everything's going to ultimately go back to mom or dad. Mm. And then we're going to see how the pattern got repeated in relationships. So then it's important to be able to trace the trajectory of our relationship history. What are the patterns that have had through lines throughout? Then also being able to, a big component of this work is forgiveness, self-forgiveness, forgiveness of other, understanding that forgiveness isn't about condoning someone else's behavior or even our own, but simply giving ourselves permission to let down that burden of resentment that we've been carrying. And understanding that the way we relate with others is the way that we know ourselves more deeply. So that we begin to understand that everyone around us is essentially holding up a mirror so that we can see ourselves. So it's all the opportunity for growth and for change. And so we want to understand that as we're looking at this trajectory of, looking at the past and understanding what made us what we are, that, as I was saying a little bit earlier, moving forward into the future, we want to be really careful about our choices and our actions and our decisions. Every choice we make determines our future. Mm-hmm. Every choice we make is the crystal ball. You know, the crystal ball showing us the future we're going to live into. So we want to get really clear on our choices and our actions to affect change. And then we also want to look at really getting clear on what is the purpose of partnership if we're looking at intimate relationship, because the book really covers all relationships, whether it be family, whether it be work-related, friendship. What's the real purpose?
Yeah.
Of the relationship itself. And understanding also that we want to look at what are the roles and poles that we've been holding. So we will most likely draw toward us, like for me, I'm very independent. I will draw toward me someone who's more needy, who's more dependent. And so instead of holding the poles so tightly, the invitation is to be able to lean in. Because once I release my grip on independent, he can release his grip on needy. I actually allow, I allow space instead of enabling him to stay needy or dependent. I allow him space to become more independent. And this kind of dynamic we'll see in every relationship. You know, it's like one holds one pole, one holds the other, and we want to come into the interdependence where it's a mutual reliance on each other.
Yeah, and I remember when only doing the first of your exercises, thinking about what might be my beliefs about relationships, I discovered some very interesting things. It's I hadn't known them before. For example, my parents never showed intimacy. So I kind of thought once you're married, it's going to be boring.
Right. Yes.
I didn't realize that. And I don't feel bored at all, but I realize I have these moments where kind of I see things through these filters that I picked up so early, but I didn't really ever think about so intensely. Yeah.
Yes.
So, speaking of intensely, I remember watching this little beautiful Instagram video that you did, speaking about how you found yourself in a big relationship challenge after you actually handed in this book. It touched me so deeply. Aww. Probably for many reasons, but also because, like you said it, in my perception, we're just somehow never done with anything. But on the other side, if we would wait showing us ourselves to the world until we are done, which we're never, it doesn't work as well. And so if that's okay for you, would you share some of your thoughts and feelings around this, and also how it relates to you now, introducing us to this book?
Yeah, you know, it was a really interesting position to be in, because as I mentioned in that video, so this book, The New Relationship Blueprint, came out on September 4th. And about a week prior, I was out on a hike thinking about the irony of this book coming out when this has been the hardest, most challenging year inside of this current relationship. And not really, I mean, I guess I would ultimately say that as someone who had for so many years been so invested in projecting that perfect persona, it was a really big deal for me to say to myself first, I'm going to come clean about this. I don't want everyone to think that that I'm perfect or that I have it all figured out. In fact, what I really found was that these steps, this book that I wrote, helped me. Because what most people don't know about the publishing process is we turn the book into the publisher about a year before the book actually comes out. So, yeah. So I had turned this book in, the manuscript in many moons ago, you know? And the crazy thing was that literally 2 weeks after I turned the book in, all hell broke loose in my relationship. And I really lost my footing. I lost my ground. And I had to really take to heart. I had to put my money where my mouth was. I had to take my own medicine. I had to really look and see what was happening here. Can I see his perspective? Can I hold mine? Can we still stay in connection? Because to me, that's the most important thing more than harmony. Staying in connection.
Yeah.
So can we still stay in connection even though even though these differences are so loud right now? And so it was really through the process of revisiting certain steps in the book around being able to move through and be able to, the very last step is lean into love. Mm-hmm. And yes, it's lean into love with another, but it's first and foremost, as we've been saying, lean into love with myself. Can I love myself enough to do what's required of me here?
Yeah.
And the should I stay or should I go ultimately becomes, because this is a question a lot of clients will come to me with. They'll come to me with should I stay, should I go? You're going to do the work whether you stay or whether you go. Don't think that if you go, it's going to be any easier, because the grass is always greener. And like I was saying before, we're on a relationship continuum. So you know what? You leave this guy or girl, the next one who comes in is going to present you the same opportunity.
Oh, yeah.
Same opportunity, just in a different outfit. Yeah.
So true. And thank you so much for sharing this. And whenever you feel like sharing again on social media, for example, I'm sure there's many people who will love to hear how you do. And
thank you.
Yeah, I'm sure I do. And I'm sure there are many.
Thank you. Well, it's interesting because there was such a tremendous response to that video. And the first place I shared it was in a free Facebook group that I have. And that's the place I shared it first. And then I decided to share it elsewhere. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting because it's inspired me. I've shared with you that I'm starting a private coaching community, a membership called Destination Me. And it inspired me to actually make one of the components of things that I'm going to deliver like a real and raw travelogue with me. Mm-hmm. So that each month I will synthesize the content we're working on inside the coaching community. And I will say, okay, here's where I am. Here's what's alive for me. Here's real life me in it. This is what it looks like. This is what's going on.
Yeah. So if somebody of our listeners is interested to join you or to just find out more about you or to work with you.
Yes.
So which are the possibilities they have and where can they find you?
Great. I'll let you know. Everything is on my website. So you can simply come to nancylevin.com. And I do coaching, group coaching programs. I do private one-on-one coaching. And as I've mentioned, I am just launching right now this new coaching community called Destination Me. And I'm so excited about it because I've for so long wanted a way to make my work more accessible, more affordable, be able, and what I love is the interaction, and I love the connection, and I love the real-time coaching with people, you know, and we're very much like this. We're on Zoom, and it's live, and it's happening, and it's alive. And so the coaching community is going to be a beautiful forum for that.
Yeah. Oh, this sounds so good. And we will link to everything that's important, your website, your social media channel.
Thank you.
And of course to the coaching. And
thank you.
I wouldn't want to close this conversation without asking you if you'd share and read to us this, I love it, this poem towards the end of your book.
Yes.
It's so beautiful.
Thank you. Thank you. So this poem is called Loved and Being Loved. No, it's not. It's called Loving and Being Loved. See, I am not perfect. Loving and being loved. Sometimes I still find it so confronting to listen closely for my desire as it rises. Still so easy for it to be blocked out by what someone else needs. We who are used to abandoning ourselves for the sake of another, or avoiding feeling by any sort of sublimation, it takes longer to listen to the voice inside, reminding us that it's only when we finally honor all parts of ourselves with permission to attend to our fullness that we will be available for mindful union. I know we all want to be heard, seen, felt, met. Yet in conflict, may we remember that staying in connection is most important. Sometimes I believe loving in disconnection is truly the most sacred practice. As myth moves out of us, we have truly underestimated who we are. Lifetimes return, passion engages, heartbeats between blooms in the shadows of caress. The mountains whisper while embracing another year. And all the time I am certain that self-love is at the root, nourishing my heart to meet yours. I am being called to stand my ground while loving and being loved. Relationship is a recurring rhythm, sovereign inside another. Intimacy inscribed on the heart. I belong.
Thank you.
You're so welcome. Thank you.
Did you ever think about publishing a book with your poetry?
My first book is actually a book of poems.
Ooh.
So I have a book called Writing for My Life that I self-published, and it is a book of poems.
And I know it's a book I would like to read.
Oh.
Thank you so much for this time and this space we've had together. I'm really, really grateful from my heart.
Thank you. Me too. Thank you for having me.
So, goodbye, everybody. And always remember to take the driver's seat of this car called your life and to create this lifetime to your taste. It's our pleasure here at Mind Gourmet to support you with our food for thought. Bye, Nancy. Bye, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye.